Just wanted to
Hey.
All right, YouTube's live.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the special council meeting of June 24th, held in council chambers and on Zoom in the town of Gibsons, and acknowledge that we are meeting within the Squamish Traditional Territory. I'll call the meeting to order. It's 7:01. As we start this meeting, there's a procedural motion, and this is related to our COVID ministerial order. And I'm just going to read this out for all of those who don't have an agenda. It's a recommendation. Whereas the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General under the Emergency Program Act has issued the Ministerial Order M192 dated June 17, 2020 in regards to local government meetings and bylaw processes, COVID-19 Order number 3, therefore be it resolved that council does allow a limited attendance at town hall council chambers where a viewing of open council and committee meetings will be displayed live, and that council limits the number of public in attendance at town hall council meetings to 5, as the meeting space will not accommodate a greater number of the public in accordance with the requirements of recommendations under the Public Health Act, and that council hereby notifies the public that links to participate in, view live, or watch archived open council meetings, council and committee meetings will be posted on the town's website to ensure openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability in respect of these meetings. This is as I say, a procedural requirement for us to comply with the ministerial order. Somebody move that, please. Councillor Kroll, second by Councillor Ladwig. Council have any questions? Okay, well, all in favor? Thank you. Thank you. And as we start tonight's meeting, I will acknowledge that Councillor Lumley has let us know that he is not available tonight, so he's not here with us. I'd like approval of the agenda, but I have a couple changes to the agenda. So the first one is that the admin report 5.2, I believe it is 5.1. We need to, 5.2.1. We'd like to bring that forward to follow the inquiries and precede committee reports, and that will shed light on some information. Also, in your agenda package, the numbering falls out of place at 5.2, so we'll follow closely. The 6, 7, et cetera, is out of place. And finally, because this is a special council meeting, we don't do the correspondence package, and we don't do council reports. We also don't do the end of meeting inquiry section because special council meetings, we have to have notice as to what's on the meeting prior to, or 24 hours prior to a meeting. So the meeting is here to discuss the items that are on the agenda package tonight. So the second inquiry section that is listed on the agenda will not be held. But we do have the first inquiry section, item 4, which is inquiries in respect of anything on the agenda tonight. So just be aware of that. And I'll also mention that we are going to have, under the correspondence letter, it's shown as 5.3, Dr. Jeff McKee for the Vancouver Coastal Health. He is going to be on the agenda. He is going to be on the call tonight and talk to that letter, as well as there may be some other people from Seashelt who wish to talk to the letter. And because of the issue and the nature of the issue, I will relax our process and enable them to speak to that particular issue, which essentially just came up as a result of a conference call, a letter received yesterday and a conference call today relative to the overdose prevention services on the Sunshine Coast. Okay, with that being said, would somebody care to move the agenda, approval of the agenda as amended? Councillor Kroll, Councillor D'Andrade, all in favor? Thank you. We'll proceed then with the We'll go right to inquiries. Son of a gun. So the first item on the agenda package is inquiries. Now, this inquiry session, as I mentioned, is for issues that are on the agenda tonight that we're going to be coming up for a discussion by council. Are there any questions around those issues?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, I'll just let everybody on the call know if you have a question to ask of council, if you could use the raise hand feature that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'll call on you in order and you can address council. And Mr. Mayor, for your awareness, I did have a email submitted to be read by me on behalf of a citizen of the town of Gibsons for this inquiry period. So if you'd like, I can go ahead with that.
For which period? Oh, for an inquiry period? Okay, yes, please go ahead.
So the inquiry was submitted by Des Delaney, and I'll read it as it was sent in. It's regarding the short-term rental bylaw that's on the agenda tonight. With regard to the following observations regarding the proposed name for the bylaw, short-term rental is a discriminatory description that does not match up with the type of business that is being operated in the home. It is frequently used as part of a derogatory narrative that incorrectly blames these small owner operators as contributing to market rental rates increases with zero data to back up this assertion. The operators of these small business invest considerable financial resources and energy to provide a top-class accommodation product that shows off the kinder and gentler side of the small town we all reside in. These higher-end, self-contained, unique accommodation offerings are of a type that can only be supplied by owner-operators within their residence. There is nothing short-term about these home-operated businesses, as they are long-term investment, which creates income for the operator and economic benefits for the other tourist-related business merchants operating in the town. The town should be more respectful of these small business and the residents who operate them and address them in an appropriate manner, the same as all other small business operators in the town. These businesses were deemed essential services by the province for the current COVID-19 pandemic, which currently has no end date. I am aware that several operators rented their accommodation during the last several months to essential service employees at heavily reduced rates, as this was the only safe option available to these employees. They will continue to fill this void until this pandemic ends. Reality is that the only short-term rentals currently operating in the town are called motels or hotels. My question is, can the bylaw name be changed to another descriptor, such as tourist accommodation bylaw or rental accommodation bylaw, or any other generic description that reflects the reality of these small owner-operated accommodation businesses instead of the current discriminatory description? I am sure you can come up with something better and less divisive and more in line with an inclusive community spirit.
Thank you. Are there any other inquiries?
Yes, I see one here, Mr. Mayor. I'll just move them over.
Suzanne, there you are. Okay. Oh, there.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm not really prepared with a proper question because I was anticipating a dialogue that I could then ask a question about on 5.1.5 on the agenda. So I guess my question is, this recommendation from the Planning and Development Committee to Council is to direct staff to report back to the committee once again on the implications of the recommendations that were put forward by yourself, Mr. Mayor, on the 2nd at the PDC, and then sort of reiterated by Councillor Deandra on the 16th. And I guess, my question is, how long are we going to keep kicking this issue down the road? It's been an ongoing conversation for a long time. The DPA guidelines lack specificity. That whole issue has caused a great deal of, conflict and concern for years. So, I'm impatient, and it's been years. So I'm looking for, how many more staff reports are we going to ask for, and can we move it along, and just get this done?
Thank you for your question. I don't know how many staff reports have been submitted on this past, certainly none since I've been here. So that we're asking staff now to take a look at it in the light of, as I mentioned to council, in the light of learning experiences from in recent months and years. And so that I believe that things can be done differently. And we're asking staff to look at that. I'm not aware of anything significant right now on the planning stage that will be impacted. So that I would hope that by the end of the summer, when we come back after summer recess, which is basically August, that we'll be come back prepared to deal with this after that time.
Okay.
That's my hope. Thank you for your question. Yeah. Any further questions? Hearing none, we'll go forward then to the administration report that I mentioned on 571 Shaw. And I'm going to look to staff for that. This is on the affordable rental housing development at 571 Shaw Road. Director of Planning, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've prepared a little PowerPoint presentation, so I'll just share my screen. It just presents some options to the design. Can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yes.
Let's see, there we go. Okay, so since this was discussed at the PDC, the applicants provided some comments. They considered the input, provided some comments and some changes to the original. So there's a memo that's been attached to this agenda that provides 4 options for council's decision tonight. And the applicants are in the audience as well if council has some more questions. So this was the March 27th submission with the original version, and it shows panel siding on the upper 2 floors. And one of the recommendations that came out of the PDC was to use less material in the siding. So what they've done, here's option 1, is they've swapped the panel siding with lap siding, and they've lightened the color on the upper 2 floors on options 1 and 2. And they've added trim around the windows. There was a request to extend the gable ends, and their comment to that is that it's a significant structural change and it would increase the project cost substantially. So what they've done is they've maintained the 3-foot gable ends. And then the vertical posts have been painted. So the request was wood cladding around the posts, and that's a lot more to maintain. So what they've done is they painted it to stand out a bit more and provide more vertical to show the height. So here's option 2 with the painted verticality there. Option 3 and option 4 are the darker options. So from the 2nd floor up, it's a darker gray. Option 3, option 4. And so the lighter 2 gray, there's option 1 and option 2 presented, and then option 3 and option 4 for council to consider. In terms of the native vegetation, what came up was a request for less cherry trees. And so what they've proposed is to swap the cherry trees with the dogwood species. So yeah, if you have any questions, we can ask the applicant.
Thank you for that report. And I guess that first of all, motion to receive the additional options that have been presented by the Director of Planning for 571 Shaw. Councillor Crowell, Councillor Ladwig, all in favor of receipt. Thank you. Discussion. I wasn't there at the planning committee meeting for the discussion, but the building looks pretty sharp to me. Councillor Ladwig.
I agree with you, Mayor Beamish. I think it looks really good as well. If it was just up to me, I would go with option 1. I'm satisfied with option 1. I think it looks great.
Yeah. Other comments? Comments for option 1 Yeah. We don't still have those on our screens to look at. I was fine with option one. Is that with the wood cladding or with the painted wood structures or without the painted wood structures?
Mayor, option one is without the painted wood structures,
okay,
but it's lighter gray on the top two floors.
Right. Yeah. Looks very nice. Other comments, Councillor Kroll?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I think that, I think they've certainly listened to the requests we made. I think the going with the lap siding makes it look a little more residential. It doesn't look quite as a little more homey feel to it rather than sort of a commercial building. So, I'm perfectly happy with options 1 or 2. They mentioned their concern about not going to wood cladding and going with the paint. Well, paint is also, a consideration. So the dark gray works for me. I'm assuming they're using something like a vertical hardy board that would be minimum maintenance. So I'm certainly agree with Councillor Ludwig. I'd be quite happy with option 1. I don't think it makes the vertical lines pop quite as severely as the brown with the wood paint look. So I think it's a little more subtle, which I appreciate, but that's only my choice. So I'm quite happy with options 1 or 2, but leaning towards 1.
Councillor D'Andrade?
First of all, I just do I have. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. I believe we forget item 5.1. Just a reminder to approve the Planning and Development Committee meeting. I don't remember unless I missed that.
No, we moved this ahead. This is
Oh, okay, so sorry.
report. We moved it ahead.
It was just, okay, no problem. I appreciate the change to dogwood. Actually, dogwood is a beautiful tree. It's native. So obviously cherry tree is beautiful, but it's just being more conscious. So I think it's a good choice. I love option 2 in particular, because I think it brings a little bit of more life to the building, and it resembles cedar. So it has the theme. But between 1 and 2, but I prefer, particularly I prefer 2.
Yeah, I'm never fond of things painted to look like other things. That's always my thought. If you're going to use wood, and so that that's why my preference is option 1 myself. So, Councillor Kroll?
And I think, as I mentioned, the concern with paint is it's going to become a maintenance factor. Whereas if the gray treatment is a actual impregnated hardy board with the color in it, then it's going to reduce overall maintenance, which is going to keep the units more affordable. And I think that's, we asked for some bells and whistles, and they came back in sincerity with they're going to impact on the costs. And this is in turn going to be, equated down to the rent. So I think it is an affordable housing unit. And I think we have to keep that in mind. I think they've done a good job. When you look at some of the other projects in town, I would not recognize this as an affordable housing unit. So I commend the designers and the team that have been working on it.
Okay, can we take a vote or straw poll on and options? Councillor D'Andrade, could you live with option 1?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, I just prefer, just on a comment that the Councillor Crow said, because when I read, they both paint, they're both paint added to the, they say option 1 and 3 would see the post painted. Oh, option 2 and 4 we painted as well. So I don't understand really the comment, but if everybody prefers 1, fine. I just find that even when I go to buy paint on the paint store, they say this is a how to say beige. It's a gray and beige town. Everybody paints gray and beige. So that's my only. I mean, I think it brings light, but I think I'm a minority here. So.
Well, if we can all live with option one, should we, Director of Planning, do we need a motion to accept option one as a change?
Sure, yeah, I'm thinking when council passes or considers to pass 5.1.2, you can add in that the DP be issued per option one.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Well, we're still on the subject, and I wasn't at the meeting, but the parking issue on O'Shea Road, was that resolved at the meeting? Was that agreed to leave it as the appears to be nose-in parking in those spaces off of Shaw Road? Is that the intent?
Was that for me?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody you can answer me, yeah.
Well, so there is still a variance for this property. So the variance, that's another part of the staff report. So the next step for that would be to notify the neighbors, and we're also, if council passes this recommendation, then we would send a referral to track for some comments, and then council would decide on the parking variance at the next. I believe it's at the July 7th meeting.
Okay. And Mr. Newman, you've introduced yourself. You have a comment? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Newman. You're on mute, Dave.
I know. Oh, there we go. Doesn't let me unmute. Sorry about that. No, I'd heard that there was some questions from an infrastructure services point of view in regards to the parking, as well as the designation of the road. And was I correct in understanding that there was some question about that?
There was some discussion on that, yeah.
Yeah, so the OCP recognizes that as being a potential through route to Mahan Road and possibly points beyond. And because it's in the OCP, it's in the OCP, and so we do need to acknowledge that that is there. I think the view at the time was to create a parallel road network so that it wasn't as much demand on Highway 101, and that we would be able to access some businesses from the rear as opposed to from 101. And as always, focuses change, and we've certainly made more of a or the natural assets are more at the forefront, and of course that road would be going through one of our natural assets, and we also plan on a stormwater pond there. So that's the reason that road has that designation, is because it's in the OCP. Staff wouldn't be able to speak to that or counter that, so to speak. But I think if that requirement had changed, that the time to do that would be during an OCP amendment. But the proposed changes to the road design could still be used as a collector road, which is envisioned in the OCP on that, but it also could be consistent with a local road. The width would be slightly narrower than a collector, but because of the local road design with the concrete bands on either side, it has much more of a local feel and a slower vehicle speed that would be more conducive to the current use of the road. It doesn't mean you're shutting the door on any future road extension, but as I say, it would certainly downplay the originally envisioned intention of that road. And if, as I say, council felt that that was no longer something that you wanted to pursue, then in the OCP would be the place to change that, because that's where that's shown. Because of the local consideration or the current local function of the road, staff felt that the angle parking could work quite well there, especially considering we just have this development and the Christianston Village which the right of way, I believe, I don't know, I have to defer to the director of planning on this, but I believe we had discussed leaving a review clause in there so that if the need for on-street parking was lower in the future, or it didn't fit with future plans for that road, that that could be revisited.
A question, Dave, is that parking on the road, is that required to meet the parking requirements of the site? Is
That's
that,
correct. So the variance is well, actually, the variance really, I believe, is to allow the change in the cross-section, the approved cross-section of the road, and also to allow them to meet some of their parking requirements on town land. And so if that parking was to be eliminated in the future, council would actually have to grant a variance to reduce the parking period on the site. But because the variance allows parking to be off-site and is designated for that site, a more significant variance on the parking isn't required.
okay, because there are a lot of people who use that road for parking as they go and visit Christian Village already.
Yeah.
In terms of parallel parking along that road, as well as many people who will use the walkway through the park will come and park there and take their walk and then come back. So, yeah, I have a concern that, I mean, you know, as a town, we provided a significant amount of property for a development, and we're having to go off property to make the development work, and that's just my concern. It's I also question the safety of it. Some of those ones, especially the ones towards the I guess it's the west end, are really kind of angled back towards the road. I can see somebody pulling out there and want to kind of drive directly out of Shaw Road, but they're kind of at a funny angle to begin with. So I'll see how the variance works. I'm not keen on it, put it that way, and I'm not keen on having the off-site parking meeting the needs. We have 50 bike parking stalls, and it's yeah, trying to make it work. I appreciate needing to make it work, but it's almost like giving up more land for affordable housing, and
Yeah.
that we've already given to affordable housing. We've given a lot. So, Councilor,
May I comment further on that, Mr. Mayor, on some of your concerns?
sorry. Yeah.
One of them is that we would be maximizing the area for public parking. This is a little bit more conceptual, the design that you have in front of you. And when we get to the actual engineered designs, we'd be asking for turning movements and so on. And so additional parking, public parking would be allocated up near the trailhead. And there is actually some underutilized parking on Shaw Road itself, fronting this property, which I can't recall anybody except myself parking there.
No.
Or, you know, there is parking to the north of O'Shea on Shaw,
Yeah.
but I don't think I've seen anything immediately south
No.
for whatever reason. So there is some underutilized parking there. And then there are engineering standards as far as how far away from the intersection the parking should be, and that would all be addressed by the civil engineers at the time to make sure that it was safe. I suppose, I'd ask the director of planning to correct me if I'm wrong here. I think there is a bit of a trade-off with the on-street parking or providing the on-street parking. I'm wondering if it's actually maybe a bit of a trade-off for less of an impact to the rest of the site, the wooded area. I don't know. I could, as I say, I would defer to the director of planning on that. So if they allowed for all, or if they accommodated all parking on site, how much would that impact the wooded area more than it would otherwise?
The director of planning.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the the biggest impact for the parking on the road, or the big reason why they want to put the parking on the road, is to allow for the community gardens and the playground and the courtyard that they've designed into their site, to create that sense of community within this development here. So if the parking is on site, then it just reduces that courtyard space, that community space.
And that's great
Cool.
space, but
Yeah.
Councilor DeAndrade, I saw you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that you brought this concern as well, because that has been my concern. The first one, obviously, is the backing up and thinking that the town of Gibsons, and hopefully the trend of the world, will be more biking, more walking, and obviously now you have kids. It is a park, so people are going there. So this is one concern as well. It's just not regular transit. It's also leisure transit, and people are more relaxed and distracted. So that's a big concern. Then another concern, even though the report talks about not bringing a precedent, but I feel, and it is challenging, because I appreciate the space given. I understand the reason why the parking is outside, but I think, so we are saying, oh, we allow this because it's an affordable housing project, but we won't allow this for another development, right? Because everybody would love to get their area and expand in a community area. So I have concerns with that as well. And so I know we are trying to, for obvious reasons, try to bring the cost down, but I have huge concerns because of these two situations, which one of them at least you brought up. So I appreciate you sharing the same concern. And I look forward to hear also from the public.
Councilor Ledwig?
I'm gonna be the odd one out here. I really support the parking plan. I've always found that road to have far more concrete than is necessary. I feel there's plenty of space for it. As someone who used to live in Kitsilano in the West End, the issues around parking in Gibsons has always confused me. You want to talk about parking challenges, go live in the West End of Vancouver, then you'll find challenges. I mean, yes, when I've been to Christensen Village, I do park along that street as well, but there's only because I can literally pull up and there's endless parking everywhere. So I pull up where it's most convenient, which is right in front of the building. But there's a whole parking lot in behind Christensen Village that every time I come up into is more or less empty. You know, it's a few vehicles, but there's always space. To me, the amenity space that facility provides is far more valuable than the impact of putting parking on the street for me personally. And the argument, I hear what Councillor DeAndrade is saying about setting a precedent, and of course everybody would like to keep their costs down and have parking off-site, but the reality is, for projects that aren't an affordable housing project, they can always go underground. It just increases the price of their units, and that's a business decision that any developer can make on their own. Not so with an affordable housing project. So personally, I do support the parking plan as is.
Councillor Kroll?
I will admit that at the Planning and Development Committee, I brought up my concern when I looked at the site plan, and there is a bit of a concern of people backing out of parking stalls. We used to have that type of parking in the lower village, and when the lower village was redeveloped, we got rid of it because there were issues. But the lower village is a through road, not a dead end. I'm going to a extended care home and a retirement facility. In my background, I did manage a 32-unit apartment building that was classified as affordable housing. And we had 32 parking stalls, one for each apartment. And there were periods when there might have been 10 cars parked in the 32-car lot, because the demographic of the people in affordable housing, they didn't have a car. It was that simple. So, I think it's something, I would like to think that road will never get put through in light of the fact of what's endeavoring to be done with stormwater management. And, you know, if we don't have to put in culverts and things like that, so much the better. So I'm prepared to live with it. I flagged it as a concern, but I think it's something, you know, moving forward that can be addressed. It's, you know, I think having the amenity space within the complex is going to be important to the people living there. And I think quality of life over a parking spot is probably a little more important.
Mr. Newman?
One other point that wasn't mentioned, and another one that I would just want to draw your attention back to, because of the design of the proposed parking stalls, the multi-use path, or actually I think it's a sidewalk at this point with enough room for a multi-use path, is actually on private property. And so Councillor D'Andrade mentioned it being an active corridor, which is true. However, there will be a fairly significant path between the parking stalls and the building area, which would be the corridor for cyclists and pedestrians. And the other point that I just wanted to draw your attention back to is that I believe there is a clause that is proposed in the right of way for the parking, or we had discussed this anyway, that we could review it in a certain period of time to determine whether or not that parking was still required. And in which case we could revisit it at that time. It was more to do with the need for public parking, I suppose, as opposed to actually eliminating the parking. But anyway.
Where's the parking for phase 2 going to go? Because that phase 2 of 30 additional units is going to go on the site. Where will that parking be? I'm looking at the diagram that shows phase 2 with not a lot of space around it. So Councillor Kroll, you have an answer?
That came up in the Planning and Development Committee meeting, and the parking for phase 2, and which is why there's only 30 units, is on the ground level.
Okay, underneath the building. Okay, good. I just remember going back to our earlier conversations where the idea was that those parking stalls would have plugins, and that hopefully there would be hybrid cars and things of that nature to them. And suddenly the parking stalls are almost half of them are off-site and on the public space. I'd be less uncomfortable if they were not designated in terms of signed to say that they are assigned to that building, even though they are within their parking requirements. But there still are people who go to Christian Village and who do the hiking around there that may want to have access to them. But if they end up being numbered assigned stalls, that I can see conflicts arising there between tow truck operators and people who just went out to walk their dogs sort of thing, and on public property. So I'm just not comfortable with it, but is this going to come back to us for a further conversation, or? Yeah, Director of Planning?
Yes, this will come back. So this step is to basically approve the notification process for the variance. So if council authorizes the notification, then we'll send a letter out to all the neighbors, and then it'll come back to council for a final decision.
All right, so we may hear from that. And I saw Councillor Kroll and Councillor D'Andrade, and then Mr. Newman. Yeah.
I was just going to say, if the parking does go through as such between phase 1 and phase 2, there's perhaps enough of a window that if it were a major issue, then those 14 stalls on Shaw Road could be addressed in the redevelopment of phase 2.
Yeah. Councillor D'Andrade?
Just a clarification on the process. Is it like the public hearing that it would be announced on the newspaper?
No.
The variant is just for the 50 meters.
That's right.
Because that's why I wanted to send 200 meters to have more feedback, right? Because there's more people that use than only necessarily the 50 meters radius.
Well, perhaps discussion will just stimulate some reporting around it. Mr. Newman?
Again, I'll probably be deferring to the director of planning on this, but I'm not sure if you mentioned about the uncomfortableness with designating it as parking. I'm not sure if that would change the variance or the nature of the variance such that you're actually varying the required parking on site, because some of it could end up being public, in which case you are actually varying the parking requirements as opposed to allowing the parking requirements to be met off-site.
Yeah.
But as the director of planning would be better suited to speak to that.
Yeah, so the variance, so what we did when we introduced this bylaw, we reduced the parking requirements through the zoning amendment. So typically an apartment requires 1.5 parking stalls. Through the zoning amendment, the applicants did a traffic study, and the traffic study supported reducing the parking to 0.9 parking spaces instead of 1.5 per apartment unit. And what they've done here is they've met the 0.9 using the road as well. The variance reduces the 0.9 to, I'd have to pull the permit up, sorry, to a smaller number, basically to allow what's on site, because what's off site, what's on the road, doesn't count as on site parking. So the variance reduces it, but the 0.9 that was reduced during the zoning amendment is met using O'Shea Road. I don't know if that was clear or not.
Councillor Crowell?
Just for clarification, so to address the mayor's question, he wanted this basically to be public parking that anyone could use. So that being the case, then it doesn't really qualify as parking for the complex. Is that correct?
Well, what we've recommended doing here is raising title to the road and registering an easement over that portion for public or for private parking. So it would be used for the residents and for visitors. In the event that residents or visitors don't use it, if they don't need it, then at that point the town could take it over. But because the parking study recommended 0.9, I'd recommend keeping that dedicated parking space for the development, and see how it plays out. We can always take it back if we want it, but we should give them, or they should have at least 0.9 parking spaces, unless they get another parking study supporting a further reduction.
So just in follow-up, then the mayor's suggestion that this parking not be signed as part of the complex, it would need to be signed to indicate that it is part of that complex.
That's right.
And I would question now, is the mayor comfortable with that?
Nope, no, but we'll see it. I mean, as I say, I think that they've maximized obviously the amenities on the site, which is great. It makes it it takes it into a very nice development, but in order to do that, the town has given up more land. That's all. I'm just concerned. There's more property, and all it's gone is for parking. So that to put more cars and more asphalt down. So that's basically my concern. It's not a kind of a environmentally friendly solution. It's just a solution. So, Councilor Diandrade?
More clarification. So the parking outside, what would it be numbered? So, okay, if I live in apartment 101, would I be, or will be just assigned for the building and anyone could park that lives in the building could park there?
I'd have to defer that to the applicants. They are in the audience. Lindsay, is it possible to bring them over?
Yes, would that be Peter Truitt?
Yeah, and Joe Chipman as well. Thank you.
There you go.
You guys are still on mute. Can you?
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think the intent with the this parking would be that it's assigned to units. We'll have, when the units are leased, one of the questions will be whether they require a parking stall. I don't know that all units will, or that all people will need cars, especially for the, as mentioned, the lowest income tenants, but generally they will be assigned.
Yeah. And where will visitor parking be?
So right now it's proposed that the visitor parking is, so there's 6 stalls and that those would be provided on the street in addition to the 2 car share stalls. And the car share in particular will be marked as such. Then there's another 6 stalls that would be for residents in particular that we would have assigned should there be demand.
Okay, Councillor Ladwig.
Just really quickly, because I know we're
Yeah.
on, but just a point of clarification for the director of planning. If I don't have the plan in front of me, but if I remember correctly, is this going to increase the concrete along that road or just kind of narrow the roadway itself? Like, I thought that maybe it's a little bit of drive or sidewalk adjustments, but it's not increasing a big portion of the road. It's not widening a big portion of the road to accommodate parking, is it? Or is it just narrowing the width of the road itself? Unfortunately, I just have this one report in front of me that's showing the siding and the details that New Commons is proposing, so I don't have the parking plan in front of me at the moment.
I would defer to the Director of Infrastructure Services for that one.
My apologies.
So it's a bit of a combination. The width of the road would be, I believe it's reduced by half a meter. And then the same cross section I'm talking about allows for parallel parking. And so where you have angle parking, that's probably, I'm guessing, maybe 5.5 meters of asphalt, you're offsetting that by reducing it by 2.5 by 3 meters of parking or of asphalt. And so your net increase is probably about 2 meters total.
6 feet.
Right. The other thing I just want to mention, just pure mathematics, if you got 0.9 parking stalls per unit, chances are you're not going to have one assigned per unit.
Anyways, I just wanted to point that out because from an environmental standard, I actually feel like keeping all the green space on the inside of the development actually has a better a net benefit versus the amount of asphalt that's being created by this additional parking. And I think you would lose a lot more by being parking inside. Never mind the quality of life of the individuals living there. I just think it's better.
I think we've beaten this up. He's going to go to variance review. Yeah. I'm sorry I wasn't at the planning committee meeting to ask all these questions, but it is it's just one thing is that it's we had recently another developer who developed a parcel and then looked to the town to provide an easement to help them solve a garbage problem. I mean, it's kind of, and we didn't allow that. And here we're allowing one to solve a parking problem. And it's a great project. We all want the project, but I believe we gave up 2.5 acres of property to enable it to happen, and we're still giving more, which is wonderful that we can do that. But at a certain point in time, we can't do that for everybody, and we have to say no at some point. So. That being said, Joe, sorry, we'll have this conversation again, I'm sure, but just understand my concern. It's not against the project. It's it's against the additional use of more space, which seems to privatize public land. That's all.
Absolutely. Understood.
Yeah. Okay, what do we need to do? We just, this was just a resolution then to receive the additional information, which we did. And there was nothing further we're going to do on that. We chose an option, option 1 for the new color. Is there anything further you require on that, Director of Planning, at this stage of the agenda? Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you. So we'll carry on to the agenda if everybody's comfortable doing that. I'm just going to turn to page 1. Okay. So now we're going to go to the committee reports, and the first one is the Plan and Development Committee minutes of June 16, 2020. And we have a recommendation that the minutes of Plan and Development Committee held June 16, 2020 be received. Motion, Councillor Kroll, Councillor Ladwig, all in favor of receipt. Any discussion with those minutes? And we'll go to 5.1.2, the affordable rental housing development at 571 Shaw Road. And the recommendation that form and character development permit be issued subject to issuance of the DVP variance 2020, receipt of staff and staff approval of updated landscaping drawings reflecting most recent parking revisions, individual pedestrian accesses for ground floor units, fronting Shaw Road, and a landscape cross-section drawing showing the relationship of O'Shea Road, landscape buffer and parking, registration of statutory right-of-way to allow a portion of the town sidewalk, streetlights, and possible future cycling infrastructure to be located on the property as proposed. Raising title to and registering an easement over a portion of Shaw Road, dedication to be used for resident and visitor parking. A plan approved by staff to protect and or replace existing trees, including a landscape plan. And a receipt by staff and approval of exterior lighting for the building. And we don't, do we have to say anything in there about the option that we selected this evening, Corporate Officer?
I would suggest that if you keep reading, the third paragraph speaks to the changes that council requested to the exterior. And I would suggest replacing that paragraph with simply that the DP be issued as per option number 1, as provided by the developer.
Okay, well, is that an add to? Yes, it's an add to. Okay. Yeah, good. Okay. As per option number 1, provided by the developer on today's date. Yeah, okay. And then the further that this council directs staff to notify neighbors of development permit application and to relax on-site parking requirements and vary road cross-section requirements to allow private on-street angle parking on O'Shea Road. And the Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society considers wood cladding. We've done that. As materials extended, okay. And further, the DVP be referred to the transportation choices track. Anything further to add to that? Somebody would like to make that motion? Councillor Kroll, Councillor Ladwig. Oh, I'm going to take that in reverse. Councillor Ladwig, Councillor Kroll. Thank you. And further discussion. All in favor? Approved. Thank you very much. Move on that one. Another page. 513 OCP and zoning bylaw amendment for secondary suites. This is a recommendation that be given first and second reading for the OCP bylaw number 98527/2020. And that pursuant to 477 of the Local Government Act, council to consider the official community plan amendment in conjunction with plans and zoning by, and also that zoning bylaw amendment number 1065/58/2020 be given first and second reading, and that a public hearing for OCP amendment bylaw 98527 and zoning bylaw amendment number 1065/58 be scheduled to begin at 5:30 p.m. on July 7, 2020, and be held electronically as authorized by the Ministerial Order M192/2020 in accordance with Section 465(3) of the Local Government Act. And further, sorry, yeah, Councilor Deirdre. No, sorry, Director of Planning.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out the public hearing here is scheduled July 7th, but we'd recommend moving that to July 14th so we can meet the legislative timelines for notifications.
Okay, July 14th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody note that. And further, the Plan and Development Committee recommends that upon adoption of the bylaws, council direct staff to prepare a parking policy for secondary suites and lock-off suites, which includes a map identifying streets that will be allowed on-street parking by rental tenants and procedural steps for how the 200 meter distance from bus stop to suite would be measured. So we move that, all that as Councillor Kroll, Councillor Ludwig. The reason I read these out is because we have a number of people on the call. And if I say received a recommendation on page such and such or 5.13, they don't know what we're actually doing. So they understand that what it relates to, and that it's for transparency. If everybody had the piece of paper in front of them or had it up on the screen, I'd be more comfortable. So any further discussion of that? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, that's approved. Thank you. And further, we have short-term rental bylaws for consideration. Council give first and second reading to number 1, zoning amendment bylaw 106547/2020. And that council gives the following bylaws first, second, and third readings. Business license amendment bylaw 666/10/2020. And notice of enforcement amendment bylaw 1125/07/2020, and that an electronic public hearing be held to begin 5:30 p.m. on July 14, 2020, as authorized under Ministerial Order M192/2020 in accordance with Section 465(3) of the Local Government Act, and further that the residents be proved by providing one piece of government ID and one piece of mail as secondary ID. And I had a question with that resolution. What is, somebody want to explain that for me? I haven't seen that resolution before. Are we voting? Corporate officer? Yeah.
I'm
Why are
sorry.
we asking you for ID?
The clause for the ID was added by council, was added by the PDC at the PDC meeting.
Okay. We require it on this one, but we don't require it on the other one. Is there? Okay.
Well, I believe the committee had issue with how they would prove that they were a resident, and so they recommended this strategy to devise that.
I've never heard that before. Is there Councillor Kroll?
Just to clarify, Mayor Beamish, in the Planning and Development Committee meeting, there was concern as to how an individual would determine this was their principal residence. So it's a means of saying that this is my principal residence and I'm operating a rental accommodation unit out of it on a
Oh, okay.
as opposed to someone who lives off the coast and is renting out a secondary residence. So it was recommended, actually, I think by one of the attendees who's in the audience tonight, that they use their homeowner grant application as proof that it is their principal residence.
So is this, but this is not intended for somebody to speak at the public hearing?
No, it's as proof of the principal residence being the subject property for the rental unit.
I tied it into the public hearing because it followed that.
I can see in the wording how that might happen, but that was not the intent
All right.
of
But,
the.
it's an interesting, I wonder if there's a better way to phrase that, that the residents be proved by providing, because really it is not connected to anything that I can see.
Councillor Ledward has a solution.
Councillor Ledwig?
Yeah, when we were discussing it, it related to people coming in and asking for a business license to run a short-term rental business. So it was in the application form. That's what that motion is about. And so we could change the wording. I totally see now why Mayor Beamish, you're confused by this. But yeah, we could change it to state that, and further that when applying for a short-term rental business license, that they are required to provide one piece of government issued ID or homeowner grant. That's a good one. as well as
Yeah.
mail.
Yeah. Yeah, resolutions are supposed to stand by themselves and be very self-explanatory, and this one isn't. That's why I tied it to the previous clause. So, corporate officer, do you have wording on that? That you're, I mean, I like what Councilor Ladwig just said, but then that proof of residence for short-term, or rather for short-term rental ownership be required.
What would you
I
suggest?
no, just something more clear than what this says. That's all I'm saying.
I'm just wondering what kind of document you have in mind that would prove
Oh,
that.
I don't care what the document is. I mean, it could be government ID or whatever, so then I'm fine with that. Whatever the document is, it's just that when we say that further residence be proved by providing one piece of government issued ID, that resolution has to stand alone. And so residence for what? Residence be proved for short-term rental ownership. Is that what we're for business license application? Council Director Stats.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So right now the application form says that 2 items verifying principal residence must be provided, and proof of principal residence must include a scanned copy of government issued photo identification. Examples of acceptable proof of residence include a recent utility bill, driver's license, or any mail from Medical Services Plan or Canada Revenue Agency.
Do we need to change that? Is that what we're saying, or Councilor Ludwig?
It was actually something I believe I requested. I just wanted the wording changed a little bit because I was concerned that when an applicant went to a counter, it would be easy to mistake that as simply 2 pieces of utility being acceptable. If someone wasn't paying attention, they might just come with 2 utility bills to say that I own this piece of this property. And anybody that runs a second house and it wants to operate it as a short-term rental business is going to have those utility bills because they own the property, but doesn't mean that it's their primary residence. So I was just simply asking for the wording of that to be a bit strengthened to ensure that they had to demonstrate that it was their primary residence and that the second ID could be a utility bill, but that it had to be a government ID proving their primary residence. So I just wanted the wording strengthened a bit.
Back to Director Stats.
So it does say that it must include a scanned copy of government issued photo ID.
Okay.
So it says that, and then additional proof would be a utility bill or something like that. But it, as written right now, it doesn't allow 2 utility bills to be accepted.
Councilor Kroll.
Could we include in that the homeowner grant application? Because that's definitive.
That's a good one.
can't claim, the homeowner grant on a secondary property. So, you can have your driver's license issued in Gibsons to get the $200 and some odd lower insurance rate and be driving your car around Vancouver to your home in Shaughnessy. So,
Suspicious bunch.
well, yeah.
Corporate officer.
Hi. Just to comment on that last suggestion with the homeowner gap, I'd have to look into the legality of using
Requiring that, yeah.
that way, because there could be some privacy implications there. So if council would like to go that route, I would suggest they request staff look into it so that we can bring back whether or not that could be done.
Yeah. Councilor D'Andrade, I haven't let you speak yet.
Yeah, I would make the motion because I like the idea of the homeowners grant, because that's a ultimate security and we want to protect, right? So I like that, and so I would make the motion.
That we include the homeowners grant.
No, for staff to verify if there's no issues with privacy, but that should be the first ID, and the secondary, maybe anything else, I guess.
We've got some time on this resolution that's not tied to the bylaw or anything else, is it? Director Stats? Is this
Yeah, it is an appendix to the bylaw. I added it to the bylaw so that there's just clarity, but application forms don't have to be attached. So, let's see.
I just want, I mean, I don't mind passing as long as we have the right wording for this. And if we use it, I can't even give you the right wording. Provide one piece of government issue ID and one piece of mail as a secondary ID, which is all you need to vote.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the same requirements.
We're actually requiring more than you need to vote for a business license. And, so that, personally, I'm comfortable with the way it exists now and the application form, as Director Stats pointed out. But if you want something more solid, we can ask her to add the homeowners grant, and then in the meantime, before it comes back up, that can always be taken out again as we go along the process if it can't be used. How's that?
I can advise council what I think the risks of the homeowner grant might be.
Yeah.
So any public body that collects personal information from an individual can only use that information for the purpose of which it was collected. So if we were to use it for this other purpose,
I agree.
we're actually mixing two databases.
Yeah.
So that would be my primary concern. Now I can look into it to see whether or not we could still use it. But just so council is aware, that's my concern with the homeowner grant.
And you know, to tell the truth, having heard you said that and recollecting that, I would rather we err on the side of caution and not even go there. I don't want people to think that we're using other forms of their records for other purposes. And I think that we need to remain relatively pure on that aspect of things. So that I think that, go with your will. If you want, sounds to me like what Director Stats has meets your requirement, meets your expectation. Could you read that once more? Sorry, Leslie Ann.
No problem. So it says, please attach 2 items verifying principal residence to confirm that it's your principal residence. That includes proof of principal residence must include a scanned copy of government issued photo identification. Examples of acceptable proof of residence include a recent utility bill, driver's license, or any mail from Medical Services Plan or Canada Revenue Agency.
Okay. Yeah, and that sounds like what you're saying here, one piece of government issue ID, which is driver's license, which is what was requested there, and one piece of mail as secondary ID, which is also covered by what Director Stats was saying.
It's fine. Grammatically, I just was concerned that people could, it's just the way it's written. It doesn't matter. I'm leaving it. It's fine.
Okay, thank you. I would be comfortable not passing that resolution for council's purpose and leaving it as per the application that already exists and will be attached to the bylaw. If council is comfortable moving the resolutions preceding that for adoption.
I'd like to talk about something else before we adopt it. I'd like to talk about Des Delaney's comments that we heard earlier.
Changing the name?
Yeah, I thought there's some validity in that.
I don't know what our OCP says or definitions in OCP and other bylaws say. That, Councillor Kroll, go ahead first. Unmute, please. Unmute.
Sorry, I was turning this around, and I know what I can hear what Mr. Delaney is saying, and I appreciate Councillor Ladwig's. The problem we have is every municipality and district has labeled their bylaw short-term rental. So what do we call it? Someone comes to the town and they're looking for the short-term bylaw, and where are they going to look?
Yeah.
So I think the directive has to come from, a higher level than us on how they address this issue. I appreciate it, but I think it creates another problem in the fact that everyone else has called it this. So we could call it the picturesque seaside village short-term rental bylaw. Does that sound friendlier? I don't know. It's, but I think it is a problem. The directive for the name change has to come from a level higher than us.
Director of Planning, where are we with all our other bylaws, such as our business license bylaw and OCP and zoning bylaws?
We've called it in the 3 bylaws, we've called it short-term rental accommodation.
Yeah.
And through a legal review, it wasn't changed. So
Yeah, I think that's consistent.
yeah,
Everywhere.
we used to have bed and breakfast, but that implies that a breakfast is provided, and that isn't always happening. So we took that out and replaced it with short-term rental. We use tourist accommodation for like a hotel use. So I wouldn't recommend using that because that would change our bylaw again. But short-term rental is essentially what it is. It's a short-term rental of a property.
Appreciate it coming forward as a concern, but it's been on our bylaws for an awful long time and referred to as such for an awful long time. And in fact, has gone through an awful lot of process and discussion as short-term rental and coming up at last minute at this stage in time. I think it's a challenge to make that change now. Now, does somebody wish to move these resolutions? Councillor Kroll and Councillor D'Andrade, seconded. Any further discussions on the resolutions? And we are eliminating the final one that asks for the identification. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. We'll move that one forward. We are going to have a busy day with public hearings on the 14th. And this one could end up being a lengthy discussion. The other one could end up being a lengthy discussion. So staff, corporate officer will have to plan on how we're going to manage that evening with public hearings. Okay, we're getting into next one is the development permit application process. And this is the one that Ms. Singer referred to. And the recommendation that council direct staff to report back to the committee on the implications of the following 2 amendments to the development permit application process. First one being that a qualified professional be required to provide an opinion as to whether or not peer review of any work being done in development permit areas 1 or 2 is required, and an opportunity for public input on permits issued or denied, which falls under the delegation bylaw. That's, I think, consistent with what I had mentioned when I was present at the meeting. And and I did provide my example of the peer review document to the CAO after the meeting that where that came up. So I'm comfortable with that, and I believe that I know staff is working on several other things, and hopefully we'll see that when their schedule permits, and it's on the agenda now for that. So somebody move those recommendations. Councillor Kroll, Councillor Ladwig, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Okay.
Mayor,
Yes.
sorry, you didn't have a discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry, discussion. I'm sorry. We didn't have any discussion. I thought you guys had discussed it all before. Did you want to discuss it? Yeah. Yeah,
I would like actually to present 2 motions, because in the conversation, there was a third item that we were discussing, which is basically to enable the town to request security for cost for major projects. So I have a motion that it's basically direct staff to prepare a report for council and local government options for attaining security deposits, performance bonds, and other mechanisms of insurance against liability occurring as a result of works undertaken under a DPA 1, 2, and 9 permits. So since staff is gonna go and prepare this report, I think this have been discussed in the past. You brought up in this discussion, and I just put in the motion on the table.
Understand that. Somebody second that motion? I'll second it. for discussion. Any further discussion on that? It really is, again, looking at best practices, what's happening in the industry. Our bylaws are 10 years old for argument purposes, and a lot has changed in those 10 years. So I'm comfortable looking to see how we can do things consistent with best practices today. Councillor Ladwig first.
Sorry, Councillor DeAndretti, can you just read it out to me one more time, just so I can hear it?
Yes, this regards bonds, right? Basically, it's a security cost when we approve major projects. So the motion is to direct staff to prepare a report for council on local government options for attaining security deposits, performance bonds, and other mechanisms of insurance against liability occurring as a result of works undertaken under DPA 1, 2, and 9 permits. So this is just on the same line because we have requested staff to provide feedback, right? So I think this is, they're doing the two works. This is a third one. And that was on the conversation when Mayor Beamish was on the
Councillor Kroll.
second.
I also support Councillor Dendretti's motion, because what we're looking at here is that the staff is directed to report back to us, to the committee on the implications. So there's an opportunity to discuss the implications at that time. So I'm fine with it. Let's,
Okay, let's call the question. I think we understand the issue. All in favor? Thank you. That's passed. Thank you, Councillor DeAndretti. Okay, I'm going to hope that Dr. McKee has showed up and stayed up. Councillor DeAndretti, did you have something else?
Oh, I had a second motion.
Okay, all right.
That regards it's in the same line of the discussion, right? Because one of the motions was the amendment of the Development Permit Delegation Authority bylaw number 1054 by adding a clause, remember?
Yes.
So I have the wording for the clause.
Well, I think the clause is here, and that was the opportunity for public input on permits issued. That was what that second one was for. That was that clause.
I was going to propose the motion itself. So
we're asking staff to investigate it, sort of thing,
Okay.
So I think rather than give them the words, I think we'll ask them to investigate it. I still have my notes from that meeting. I know what I said as well. So, okay. If we can move on the agenda. We have a correspondence. Has everybody had a chance to read it? This is a correspondence from Dr. Jeff McKee, and this is concerning overdose prevention services on the Sunshine Coast. And Dr. McKee, thank you for joining us tonight. And I believe, corporate officer, there will be a number of other people who may have joined us. Hawkfeather may be one, if she's present. Perhaps she could put her hand up to you, or others who are on this particular issue, and you could identify them. Sorry,
Mr. Mayor, I'll just break in at this time to ask anybody who'd like to speak on this issue to please raise your hand, and I'll move you over as a panelist. That should be everyone, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, no, yeah, okay, good. Rodney and Hawkfeather, thank you. Flying a bit under the radar in Gibsons is an issue that's important to the whole Sunshine Coast, and that's the issue of drugs and the dangerous drugs that are on our street today that have resulted in overdoses as well as overdose deaths. And we had one recently near Gibsons, not in Gibsons. Certainly are happening elsewhere on the coast, up and down the coast, and elsewhere in the province. And the problem was identified, came to attention this past week when Hawkfeather and peers in Seashelt set up a ad hoc pop-up overdose prevention service in Seashelt. And then that caused some attention from the community as well as from the RCMP, but it had the effect of raising the issue, and hence Dr. McKee's letter. And by way of introduction to that, that's all I'll say right now. It was further brought up at a meeting that we had with the community action team in Sechelt today, and looking for the opportunity for having either a mobile pop-up or mobile overdose prevention services, or safe injection site is always kind of also known as, and that would be mobile enough to move up and down the coast as needed, and provide service to people who require that service. So, Dr. McKee, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for staying with us tonight. I suggested 7:30. Yeah, well, we're just an hour on. So you're on mute right now, I notice. So please unmute yourself, and thank you. Explain
Thank
yourself. We got a letter here.
Well, thank you. And I apologize. I had some bit of difficulty with audio there when I was switching over. And so I apologize if I missed anything there.
You're good now.
But I appreciate both Mayor and Council. I appreciate the opportunity to come to speak with you tonight, and I appreciate the correspondence being on the agenda. As Mayor Beamish mentioned, this has kind of come about through some work that's been done by some peer advocates to start up some services here on the coast. I think it's we're now having a conversation about what might overdose prevention services look like on the coast here. Because just for some background here, we have we do know that we're continue to be in a public health crisis regarding overdoses in the province. We have a drug supply that is both contaminated, and there's quite a bit of fentanyl out there. And we know that over the last few years, there's been a considerable number of deaths provincially from overdoses. And so there's been quite a response as well to ensure that we try to address things in a multi-pronged approach. This both includes harm reduction, treatment, as well as prevention, and other components. Through this, overdose prevention sites have been one key tool that we've looked at. And this is also as part of this response, we've developed many different kind of collaborative approaches to dealing with this, the community action team being one of those. And I think it's been a very good way of bringing together different partners as well as peers and people with lived experience on the coast to have these discussions. The correspondence that I provide today is just outlining more from an information standpoint to outline the process and some of the thoughts behind overdose prevention sites and how they operate from kind of a legal standpoint in the designations under the Public Health Act. And as medical health officer, what that designation looks like, and how we work together with our partners to see how those can be implemented under that designation. So I present this to the correspondence to you just to give that bit of that background to help inform some of these discussions going forward. So I'm open to any questions today regarding kind of those the letter that I provided and any other concerns.
Thank you. Just for clarification, in your third paragraph down, or your fourth full paragraph, it says at the end, it says that for the duration of the public health emergency, if designated as an overdose prevention site by the local medical health officer, assuming they meet health authority requirements. So understand the process is that you as the health officer would be responsible to designate a site once one is kind of planned and before it becomes operational?
Yeah, so thank you, Mayor Beamish. In the overdose prevention sites, it's not usually kind of one specific way in which it's operated. There's a whole bunch of different models for overdose prevention sites. The designation piece really is allowing that site to operate under the public health emergency, because we know that the use of illicit substances is illegal in these situations. And so through that designation, it does allow for those sites to operate with that designation. So there's a few different ways it pops up right now. If we have an unsanctioned one that doesn't have an official designation, if we receive an operating plan and we have a discussion and look at all those different requirements, then a designation can be made at a site. Now that's within the confines of the public health emergency. Some other background here is that overdose prevention sites, as we're talking about them right now, are under this public health emergency. They're temporary measures for the duration of that public health emergency. That being said, these are often evidence-based interventions for preventing overdose. And so there's more long-term ways in which these can operate as well, which is under those federal exemption programs. And that's the reason why this program, the OPS kind of approach under the Public Health Act was implemented, is because it's a faster approach. It takes a long time and there's a lot of work to get one of those more sustainable long-term supervised consumption sites going. So this is kind of an interim measure to be able to provide these services. Does that answer your question there?
It does, yeah. And I'm going to go to, before we open for questions, I'm going to go to Hawkfeather Peterson first. And Hawkfeather, can you unmute?
I sure can.
Okay. Could you tell us about the problem? Why is this needed on the Sunshine Coast, and why would this be needed in Gibsons?
I think it's needed everywhere in British Columbia. May saw the highest numbers of overdose deaths ever in the province, even since the crisis had been declared in April of 2016. And yeah, we haven't been immune to it. We're losing folks locally. The community action team has started some really preliminary discussions about a site, and we unfortunately lost 3 people while those discussions were happening. Yeah, I do think it's important for people to know historically that while it looks like a revolutionary or disruptive act to put up an unsanctioned site, historically, that's actually been how a lot of the sanctioned sites have come about. It's actually a fairly common precedence that peers will set up an unsanctioned site, and that will be what spearheads a sanctioned site being created in a community, especially in a community where we're being told by our health authority that there's no funding available, which is some of the communication we've been, told that there wasn't really funding available. So yeah, I understand.
I've lost you, Hawkfeather. Hawkfeather, we're not hearing you here. Perhaps Rodney, do you want to add anything?
Sure, Bill. I think one of the main reasons why an OPS is necessary almost is fentanyl. I work in the safe injection site Tuesdays and Fridays, and we test for fentanyl. And it's kind of common knowledge that the heroin, so they haven't had straight heroin in years. You can't find heroin without fentanyl in it. But the problem is now, and why we're seeing these tragedies, is it's also in what they call side. It's in their meth and their crack and stuff, and they're not used to that, and they don't have a tolerance for it. So Gibsons might not have the IV problem that Seychelles does, but they definitely have users that smoke. I live in the affordable housing, and I'm friends with these people. I know some by name. So the concern is if we don't have a safe place for these people to use, that they're inadvertently going to use stuff with fentanyl in it. And when we have an OPS, we have the ability to test their drugs. They need the smallest amount. They're not losing financially when we test. It's a very, very small grain of rice size, and we can test their drugs. And then they can then use safely in front of us. And we've never had a fatality in these overdose prevention sites. I feel very proud in that and helping people. And not everybody can watch somebody digging in their arm for a half an hour. I can't, right? And there's some of us are willing to help. And some of us know that unless we get an OPS up, there's just going to be more and more fatalities. And the main reason is fentanyl. It's a dirty drug supply right now. And we just have to do something about it. I mean, there's been tragedies in my building. I lost a friend in my building. I don't want to get emotional, but it's very real. It's very real. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. Now,
and I apologize, Bill. I that was the worst possible time for me to lose my signal, but I'm back. I apologize for that.
All right. Do you have anything you'd like to add before I open up for council to ask you questions?
The one thing I did want to add is that there's some frustration on the part of a lot of substance users in the community because the roadblocks to this feel easily avoidable, and they really haven't been. So, well, we need Jeff to sign off on our site, but we also need a location, but we're not being approved for a location because we don't have Jeff signed off. So that's kind of why things like this happen, where we set up, like you said, an ad hoc site. It forces the dialogue, and while that looks, maybe like a negative motion to some people, it's just necessary. It's just absolutely necessary. So I'm happy to answer any questions about what we're doing or address concerns. But yeah, I just appreciate the mayor and council bringing it to the attention of the Gibsons community for sure.
Okay, councillors, you for questions for Jeff or Rodney or Hawkfeather? Councillor Kroll.
I sort of have a bit of an advantage here because I was on the conference call this morning and the later Zoom meeting. And I think one of the huge issues that we're facing is nobody likes to admit we have the problem in the community. And to that end, there's this horrible stigma that's associated with it. And if you look on social media, there's memorial sites there, and the vicious attacks that are made on human beings because they have a problem. And as a community, we need to recognize that people have the problem. Some people have prescription drugs from their pharmacist. They may have a bigger problem than some of the people that are dying in the streets, but they have a good job. They have access to clean drugs. One of the big things that is apparent is that the drug manufacturers themselves, in some cases, have precipitated the problem because people become addicted to drugs, then they lose their job. Now, where do they get their drugs? They're buying whatever they can get, but the habit was not necessarily created in the street. And as a community, I think it's critically important that we realize this problem exists. One of the things that's come out of the COVID crisis is one of the aspects we're not seeing of it is the stress that people are going to be suffering when it ends, because you don't suffer the effects of stress while you're dealing with the problem. It's when it ends and that you're suddenly slammed. So we may have a whole wave of healthcare workers who are, need to be supported by drugs. So I think as a community, we really need to address this problem. It's not just in the streets, it's in private homes, on expensive, well-lit streets with, expensive cars in the driveways. But to dehumanize people that have the problem is unconscionable. And it's something that I think has touched us all in one way or another. I keep something fairly close to me. It's a mass card. And this problem, drug problem, my cousin, 31 years old, died in the 4th of March, 1981. The problem hasn't been solved. It's just getting worse. And as long as we hide it under, derogatory terms for the problem, we're only allowing it to continue. So, we have an opportunity. We've got a really good proactive team, that we can liaise with. And I think as a community, we need to address the issue. It's not going to go away. One of the comments that I would just like to share, and this is a quote: "Time to decriminalize drugs and treat addiction like a health problem, not a criminal problem." And that quote was from one of our students on council. And I think, someone that age realizes the problem, and we can't hide it. And I think it's time that, rather than losing more lives, we address the problem and try and save lives.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Kroll. Councillor Ladwig.
So I'm trying to understand what's sort of being asked of us this evening. We've received the report and it's very informative, and I thank you to everyone that's come here this evening to further educate us. But what is being asked of us here today?
Hawkfeather, do you want to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. The site that we opened was shut down. it was shut down by the RCMP. I just wanted to note too that the call that we were on this morning to the community action team, the Nick Gaskin that runs the High Tide Center that's there, had to get off the call because there was an overdose exactly where our tent had been set up. And had our tent been there, it wouldn't have happened. And we were shut down by the RCMP, and we need permission to exist. We need a site, and we need, you know, the mayor and council to approve our existence so that we can save lives in Gibsons. I do feel like Gibsons gets neglected a lot in the conversations in the Sunshine Coast around substance use harm reduction and overdose prevention. And I think it's overdue that we're discussing what we can do in the community to help protect the community members there. So that's basically what we need. We need dialogue, but we also need permission so that we can have a safe consumption site in Gibsons.
Okay, but just before we move on, I just so I'm clear. So what was being asked for is like structurally what we're looking at is a tent somewhere in
Yeah, I've been using a tent. A tent is really an interim measure, and a lot of peers in the community have communicated that they would prefer a mobile unit because of the you know, the geography of this community. It would just make sense that something could be moved from Seashell to other communities to Gibsons. For now, we're using a tent because that is as mobile as we can get. There's just no property that's being, you know, we were told the Seashell district wouldn't allow us to set up there either on district land or private property. So we're looking for, you know, community partners that already hopefully serve this population, that we would be able to have our tent set up, not daily, even just some days a week, so that we can, you know, try to, you know, stem the tide a bit of this devastating epidemic here.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor DeAndrade next.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. Well, obviously, I'm supportive of this initiative. I have not been particularly touched with someone close to me, but I understand and I support decriminalization because it's the way forward to understand and treat this. So I understand what's currently is happening. I have even been during the pandemic, I read a lot of reports, what even actually based in studies done in the past, how this kind of pressure, this kind of situation leads to so many health suicides and things. So it's not surprising what we're experiencing, and we have no idea what's coming. We still don't know what's coming. We're all optimists, but we don't really know. So I think just to on the questions that Councillor Ledwig, I'm just looking for more objective in terms of do we have a proposal? Has the town of Gibsons or mayor, do you have an idea? Is that a place that we can support that?
I'll go to Councillor Kroll first.
Just sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff and Hawkfeather, if we approve OPS site in Gibsons, and then it would go to Coastal Health, they would approve it, and that being the case, it becomes a safe site. So people going into the site, they can be observed. They do some record keeping, so you know, they can, you know, do follow-ups with people. It's people making contact, which is important. But once it's, correct me if I'm right here, Jeff, once it's approved by Coastal Health, then the RCMP won't come charging in with guns blazing, arresting people for having illegal drugs. It creates this little safe spot. And what it does is it ensures that people aren't taking bad drugs, that they aren't ODing. And yes, it's probably a hard pill for the community to swallow. But I think it's something that's critically important because we're dealing with a problem that's not improving.
Jeff, do you have any response to that?
Thank you, Councilor Kroll. Yes, the designation under the Public Health Act is what does allow that protection of that site for the consumption of illicit substances and possession of illicit substances for personal use on that site. So as noted in there, I think choosing a site is the first thing, and then it would be coming up with an operational plan and having that discussion at that point to go through those different criteria that was in the letter, and then once that designation was made under the Public Health Act, that one site would be permissible legally for the period of the public health emergency.
Jeff, as a mobile unit, you designate the unit and wherever it parks, or how do you do that?
Yeah, I'd have to look into the specific. I haven't actually designated a mobile unit. At this point, it has been done elsewhere. Sometimes there's particular sites that mobile unit goes to, so the designation may tie it to the sites. I'd have to look into that a little bit more to figure out what a mobile designation would look like.
Hawkfeather, what kind of hours of operation do you perceive for a site?
What we found when I also run the drug user group in harm reduction space in Seashell, and what we found was that hours in the afternoon and evening were when we had the most action and when we had the most, clients coming by. We're also trying to set up, harm reduction services that kind of are available for when our local harm reduction worker isn't available. His hours are shifting. He'll only be, being able to hand out harm reduction materials 3 days a week. That leaves us quite a bit of time where no one even has access to harm reduction in our community. So yeah, my suggestion would be that it's in the afternoon and the evenings, and to figure out what days work best. It's usually best to do it trial and error and just kind of see when people show up. We had to move around our hours a fair bit at Connections just to both best serve our population, But so far, it does seem like the evening is the best.
Have you talked to anybody in Gibsons so far about potential location?
We have a local resident offering their home as a location. We want it to be as accessible as possible. It is best to have them. It's like a delicate balance of having it, obvious to substance users and accessible to substance users without flying in the face of the community that might oppose it. So it's a bit of a dance, right? That you're trying to find a space that is hopefully already known to substance users, where they already feel comfortable, where they already feel safe, where they're not going to be, at risk, and we're also going to be not alarming neighbors, right? That's the hope and the goal.
Councillor Kroll?
I was just going to ask Hawkfeather if because I hear what she's saying, and this has come up at some of the other CAT meetings we've had, where the people that are seeking the resource also need to be comfortable going to it. So there's the side of the neighbors or the surrounding area that has to be considered, but it also has to be comfortable for the people that in need. So I would really like to hear from Vancouver Health, Coastal Health, if they have input, and Hawkfeather, to find a location that is going to serve the need and not, inflame the immediate neighbors in the community. And yes, it's going to be a bit of a dance, but, and I know Hawkfeather's, concentration has been in the Seashell area, but I would certainly, if we were able to come up with, some locations, review them between Coastal Health and Hawkfeather, and see if you can give us a list of criteria you're looking for that we could work towards, that would be really appreciated.
I can certainly do that. That I think would be actually really beneficial. I actually had a question for Jeff myself. Chris Van Veen, another VCH rep that is a member of the community action team, has expressed that a sanctioned site has to come hand in hand with funding from VCH. And is that true for just getting an exemption for an interim pop-up? Like, I just kind of wanted some more information about that, because that's not something we have control of. Even if mayor and council approve our site, we can't force VCH to give us funding. And if that's a requirement, that could be a hang up.
I could speak to that. So it isn't necessarily attached. It's not one of the criteria that's in the letter there. It's funding. There's kind of this continuum of how overdose prevention sites have operated in different places. In some cases, there has been some health authority funding attached. In other cases, it hasn't always been. So I think it's more about the fact that we work through an operational plan and kind of get a sense of how things are working. And so it doesn't necessarily have to have that. And I think, as acknowledged, there is limitations, and funding has been a barrier to some of these, but it isn't necessarily directly tied in with the designation.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And I'm actually very happy to make an operational plan. I wouldn't mind chatting with you sometime about that, because I've been following the model of this Tent Saves Lives instructional book that was used for, some sites in Ontario, and I think Molson started that way very way back when pop-ups were around in Vancouver. But anyway, I just kind of want a little bit more direction of what's required of that plan, so that I can check all those boxes. And again, I'm still really just envisioning this as an interim solution, and my hope is that we have a like Councillor Kroll said, we need a space that peers feel comfortable and feel safe, and what's on the table right now is Rain City Housing. And as much as I admire the work they're doing, the peers I work with aren't particularly comfortable there. We have a really large population of folks that have been banned from that site. So we're looking for alternatives, and alternatives that would include Gibsons. And I just want to make sure, we're checking all the boxes properly, and that we're doing what we can to serve the whole community.
Councillor Ladwig, I think you had your hand up.
I was just going to say that, yeah, it would be great to get a proposal, a report back on this. It's been a good introduction to the topic. I still feel like I am totally, I don't want to say uninformed, but I feel like there's a lot behind this story or issue that I would want to wrap my head around a little bit more. Like, for example, I kind of struggle to understand why Hawkfeather, why your temporary facility why it's not sanctioned in the first place, and why it was closed. And you said you were operating one in Seashell, is that correct?
Yeah, I would also love to know why it was shut down.
I feel like
I honestly think that when Councillor Kroll was speaking of the stigma that surrounds substance use, I really think he nailed it on the head. I think that in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, our knowledge and understanding around substance use has really changed, and the work towards destigmatizing substance use and bodily autonomy around seeing substances as medicine instead of as the negative outlook people have. I think all of that taps into it. We have some really harsh laws, and the prohibition hasn't been serving substance users very well. A lot of people believe that's really been what's led to the death rate that we have, and it's a matter of trying to pick it all apart and find out how we can educate the community. And you often have to do it fairly delicately, but I think that it's an issue that people still recoil at, right? A lot of people see it as enabling. A lot of people see it as, a lot of people celebrate the overdose crisis. I have to say, I come across that daily, where people consider it calling the herd of an a undesirable population. And as much as I hate to say that, it's a reality. It's just a reality we face, that we're not an accepted and embraced population, and it makes it really hard to seek out services and make them accessible when they really challenge quite a lot of people. So I really think that it's a complex question. I don't think we should have been shut down. But yeah, we were, and now we're trying to figure out what to do about it.
I'm going to want to wrap up the conversation, and I want to thank Hawkfeather and Rodney for the work you are doing, because it's a very important work in our communities. And Jeff, I thank you for taking your time to be with us tonight. Darnella Seegers, Mayor Seegers, let me know today that this was on their agenda this afternoon. And they voted to refer the letter to staff for potential implications and to come back with potential sites for a temporary OPS and sea shelter. Now, I see this as a coastal issue, not just a sea shelter issue. And what I would like to suggest, if council agrees, that we direct our CAO to contact the CAO in Sea Shelter and see if we can work with them to come up with a solution that would be one solution for the coast. It may be different locations, but it'd be one approach, and that we could work together on that. The idea of a mobile unit, I mean, supporting financially the mobile unit is something that perhaps the coast could look at, and along with the regional district. But I think that this is the first time this issue has been on our council agenda in 2 years. And I think that we should look at working it, if we can, regionally, like we're doing a number of issues, and recognize that the people who are addicted are not confined to the boundary of the town of Gibsons, within the town of Gibsons. They do travel up and down the coast as well. And we should see if we can't find an accommodation that recognizes that. And if council is comfortable with a resolution that we ask the CAO to work with the District of Sechelt CAO and see if we can't work together on a joint proposal and identifying the implications and potential sites and opportunities to work with peers and health. My personal preference is that any site that is approved, any process that is approved, meets the requirements that Dr. McKee has outlined in his letter, so that it becomes a sanctioned site and is properly done. Because I think that is on our side, our accountability to the community, that's the direction we're going in. And that we can point to that and say, no, this meets all the requirements and has been sanctioned by BCH. And that would be probably my what I would want to see happen to a site. So how does council feel about that? Councillor Kroll?
I certainly am in agreement that we need to, I know that we're going to be dealing with this tomorrow at the regional district as well. So, I agree that we need to work together, as to use Director Pratt's term, Team Sunshine Coast. It's something that we need to take on. But I think we need to keep the option open that we may need, that safe shelter within our 2 square miles.
Absolutely. I'm comfortable with that. And our CIO could certainly come back to us with that.
And just one other thing, I would like to commend Coastal Health. I was introduced today to the Lifesaver app, which I think is, I wasn't aware of it. It totally amazing technology that's been employed to save lives. And, it's available to anyone who's, on prescription drugs even, potentially save people's lives. And I think, the fact that this technology has been created to address this massive problem speaks volumes. So, I certainly support it here, and I'll support it tomorrow at the regional district.
Can I quickly, Bill? I just wanted to thank you again, and I wanted to thank Jeff. He stepped up really quickly to write this letter and provide the background that he did and the information he did. And the whole intention here was to start these dialogues, and he allowed that to happen by giving that information. And I'm really grateful for Mayor and Council to do this and to host the conversation. So thank you.
Council, could with somebody support a resolution? I'll make the resolution that we ask our CAO to contact the CAO of District Sechelt to look if we can come up with a joint approach to this issue, and that and if possible, also include the CAO at the regional district. And I know these guys are working well together, and will work for us and come up with something. And Counselor, I'll move that. Counselor Kroll, second that. Okay. Further discussion? All in favor? Thank you very much. I'm sorry, CAO, you didn't get a vote on that, but I'm sure we'll talk about it. Jeff, thank you very much. Rodney, thank you very much as well for your input to the night's meeting. And Hawk Feather, thank you. And we will keep you all informed. Counselor Kroll?
Looking at what else we have on the agenda, I think we may need to.
Oh,
make
yeah.
a
And
change.
we're going to be reminded right now. Yeah. So the motion. What did you suggest a time, Counselor Kroll?
Just depends how quickly we can go through.
Bylaws should be fairly quickly. It's then getting to the closed meeting.
I would say minimum 9:30.
Okay. How's everybody else feel? It's not like you're not used to this. You were here last night too. Yeah.
9:30?
All in
Okay.
favor for
We
9:30?
have
Counselor
another
DeGrad?
meeting, right?
Sorry?
We have another meeting, right? After that.
Yes, we have another meeting after this, yeah. So, and that includes the other meeting though.
Yeah, I'll support it's 9:30, but I do want us to be cognizant, and I just say this to all of us, out of respect for staff and everyone's time, we do need to start tightening this up. Like it's,
I appreciate that.
everybody's got a long drive home.
Should have thought of that when you started talking an hour ago.
Well, yeah. Anyway.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go on to bylaws, and first one is the OCP bylaw on secondary suites, bylaw number 98527. Recommendation that's be given first and second reading.
I'm sorry to break in, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure that was moved and seconded and voted on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Councillor Kroll moved it. Councillor DeAndrade seconded it, and Councillor Ladwig had the final word. Okay, all in favor. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the official community plan amendment bylaw 98527 2020 be given first and second reading. Moved by Councillor Kroll, seconded by Councillor DeAndrade. All in favor? Thank you. That's approved. Zoning amendment bylaw 1065-58 secondary suites. The zoning amendment bylaw number 1065-58 be given first and second reading. Moved by Councillor Kroll. He's always so fast. Second by Councillor DeAndrade. All in favor? Thank you. One thing I've noticed on our agenda packages lately is that we don't record the mover and seconder. So it doesn't really matter how fast you are here. You're not getting any more bonus points at the end of the year. So zoning amendment bylaw 1065-47 short-term rentals. Short-term rental zoning amendment bylaw 1065-47 2020 be given first and second reading. Councillor Ladwig, Councillor DeAndrade, all in favor? Thank you. And short-term rental business bylaw number 66610. That's short-term rental business bylaw amendment 66610 2020 be given first and second reading. Councillor DeAndrade this time. Councillor Kroll, thank you. And short-term rental accommodations bylaw 112507 be given first and second reading, first, second, and third reading. Okay. Councillor DeAndrade, Councillor Ladwig, okay, all in favor. Thank you. Thank you for that. A quick item, and that is BC Ferries update. There's been a lot of issues and concerns in the community, and Councillor Kroll is on that committee. Oh, sorry, Director Stats. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to confirm the business license bylaw 666-10, item 6.4, that's for first, second, and third reading as well.
First, second, and third. Did I read first, second reading? Okay, first, second, and third is as written, not first, second, and third. Everybody understand that, or do you want to revoke that? You understood that? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, BC Ferries update, 7.1. Councillor Kroll, did you wish to provide a report on that?
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I think everyone's sort of aware that the coast sort of went ballistic with the new ferry schedule. BC Ferries, it was insane. We sort of screamed blue murder that there were no late sailings. BC Ferries put on a boat. And then the delays started. I think there was one day last week, the boat was running 2 hours late. So there've been a series of meetings, conference calls. The upshot of it all is that BC Ferries is going to adjust the schedule to allow crew the proper time to do a turnaround. They were trying to do a turnaround in 20 minutes and it's physically impossible. So they're adjusting the schedule to give proper turnarounds. And they're also adding an additional sailing to break that 4-hour period in the middle of the day. So it seems that when all levels of government on the coast get together and work together, BC Ferries listens. Cathet was also involved in it. There was, I could show you mile-long threads of emails that have gone back and forth. But, BC Fair, the corporation has listened. So, and basically what's coming out of it, as demand increases and they can see that the volume overall is increasing, they will respond with increases to service. It won't be at the snap of your fingers because it's like a dinosaur trying to do a U-turn. But they've responded to us, and thanks to everyone involved for the hard work they did, because it was like pulling hen's teeth, but it happened. So an adjusted schedule will be coming out. It's going to impact on bus, because I know there was some transit concerns on the coast with the ferry schedule and the bus schedule adjusted to the ferry schedule. People couldn't get to work on the coast because the buses weren't working for them. So there's going to be a lot of adjustments. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, I hope we get back to the 2019 schedule for the summer, because we are going to be busy and we are going to need all the ferries we can get. So thank you. Okay, nothing further. No inquiries tonight on this. So we will have a motion to close, and that the meeting be closed in accordance with section 91E of the community charter. And that is a subject that relates to one or more of the following, and that is for acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements. Council considers a disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interest of the municipality. Motion to close. Councillor Kroll, Councillor Diandrad, thank you. Thank you, everybody who stuck with us tonight, and thank you, staff, as well. This was just a bonus day, we don't usually schedule a meeting on a Wednesday, so thank you for being here and for your support to council. And we will see you on the conference call. Thank you very much.